Okay. Wow, we're in. Okay, excellent. Oh, well, thank you, Amelia, and please let me know if I'm pronouncing that okay. But thank you so much for being here. Thanks everyone who is listening to the Calm Bomb podcast again. And I'm your host, Raquel Sands, career and business strategist for progressive millennials and Gen Z. I'm so glad to have Amelia on the show today and pick her brain, hear her story, share wisdom, a bit of her backstory, and then I would like her to share in her own words. Amelia is a feminist writer, podcaster, and producer with a PhD in philosophy. That's amazing. From DePaul University. Over the past decade, she's been a university professor, community organizer, and a radio DJ. How cool. Oh my gosh. She is the founder and executive producer of Softer Sounds, a feminist podcast studio that supports women and non-binary small business owners in creating purposeful, powerful podcasts. Since leaving social media in April 2021, she's also launched Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. On the show, she interviews business leaders, former influencers, shares stories, strategies, and experiments for growing your business with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. Yes. Amazing. Oh my gosh. So there's so much there. What does your day in a day in a life look like now? Or how would you, in your words, say, what do you dedicate yourself to?
Wow. I mean, two very different questions for me. I feel like what I dedicate myself to, I perhaps have a much loftier answer. I mean, it's going to be something like freedom, joy, pleasure, community.
Yeah.
The things that are the most important values in my life. That's what I try to stay dedicated to through my work. But I love these questions together because it's like, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, yeah, I'm dedicated to joy. That's like nice to say, but like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, a typical day in my life, if I'm working on any given day, I typically wake up between 7 and 8, normally without an alarm. I just wake up when my dog gets up and we go out and I drink some coffee and then I make my way to my desk for the day and I will have calls, meetings, recording sessions, talking to clients. I'll normally do some editing. I edit audio almost every day, reply to a bunch of emails.
Beautiful.
And then I try to be done working. Well, typically my energy like kind of bottoms out by 2 or 3 o'clock. So I take a break, eat some food. And then I might come back for a little bit more in the evening. But I also like to walk my dog and hang out with my spouse in the evenings. And I live I live in Nebraska. It's not a rural area by any means. I live in a college town.
Yeah.
But my evenings are just kind of spent at home, sometimes with friends, but normally just my partner and my family. And that's kind of a typical day in my life. It's like wake up, settle in, work, take a little break, hang out.
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And it feels like you're embodying the freedom, joy, like your values. Like it's not just in theory. It's like you're actively applying it in ways that make sense in your life. And I know I have other questions, but keeping it fluid, how did you, like looking backwards, because PhD in philosophy, university professor, like it sounds very academic and maybe hierarchical in some ways. How did you end up in this? Like, how did you get today?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
My path was definitely not linear. And I didn't know where I was going, honestly, like any step of the way.
Yeah.
So I went to grad school right out of undergrad, which is not necessarily typical. Like I went straight into a PhD program when I was 22. And I moved to Chicago for that. And I spent 7 years in that program, finishing my PhD and teaching at the university.
Wow.
And while I was doing that, I was kind of planting these seeds or following these sparks of interest.
I love it.
So that's how I ended up DJing at the radio station. It's also how I ended up doing some community organizing in different ways around the city, some with more like activist groups, and then in other instances with more like small business owners and creatives who are just hosting events and doing things to bring people together.
Amazing.
And that really led me to my love of small business and my
Oh,
love of, I would agree. I think like in academia, it's so hierarchical, it's so
mm,
institutional, but a place where there is still a lot of freedom is on that like day-to-day level. Like I loved that I didn't have a 9 to 5 schedule. I
yes.
loved that my schedule was different every single
Yes.
term of the
Yes.
academic calendar.
Yes.
And that type of time freedom, or at least like nobody telling me like micromanaging my daily life,
Yep. Yep.
was like really important to me.
Mm,
So when I did finish my program and get my degree, and then I had a part-time job that I really liked, but it had these like I had to work every day from 1 to 6, and I was very like managed during that time,
yeah.
and I hated it. Like it was just not for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that really led me back into entrepreneurship. I really, really wanted and needed that type of flexible scheduling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm such a like naturally self-motivated, hardworking person that
Yeah.
it works for me to have a super flexible schedule. I like to be in control of my schedule. So in a
Um,
certain way, they're very different, but
yeah.
there was like this seed of like what I needed was that
Yeah.
type of time freedom and
Yeah.
self management, I suppose. And I
Yeah.
found that in both academia and small
Beautiful.
business ownership.
Oh my gosh. No, I love that. And I think something that's so, at least that I hear when I work with clients or even like on social media, even though I'm not always on social media because that's a whole other world that we can talk about, is this thing about how do you find your path or like the seed? And I think that's really hard. Were you into like self-assessments, or did you feel very intuitive, like in tune with your inner knowing? I'm just so
Mm.
curious because I think that's what, at least for me, that's one of the hardest things is taking the jump or knowing where to take the jump. And yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
I do love like spiritual meaning making systems.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of tarot, which I've been reading for myself for almost a decade now.
Oh my
I
God.
also love astrology and human design. I have dabbled in Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
Strength Finders,
Yeah.
even a little bit of Enneagram, although I never quite made
Yeah.
sense to me
Same.
personally.
Same. It's another a bit over my head. Yeah.
But I think that really, like,
Mm.
I love those systems. They have definitely helped me make sense of myself. They've helped hone my intuition by just, like, reflecting all of these different facets of me back to myself.
Mm.
When I do think about, like, my career path, so much of it has just been, like, being willing to try things and to show up for stuff
Mm.
and trusting my gut and, like, whether it was for me or not for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really kind of what led me, I guess, to the like subject matter of how I work. That's what led me to the radio station, which led me to podcasting. That's
Amazing.
what led me to like working with the creative business owners group.
Amazing.
So I think that kind of led me those directions. But then what the meaning making systems did was actually help me learn more how I work. Like once I found what I loved to do,
Yeah.
learning things that like the fact that I'm a Capricorn rising, Aries sun, Gemini moon, or that
Yeah.
I'm a generator,
Yeah. Yeah.
or that my life path number is 7, like
Right.
learning
Right.
all of that,
Yeah. Yeah.
it helped me figure out how to do the things I love doing. But it was just like life experience that I needed to figure out what the things that
What?
I love doing were.
Yes, 100%. And I think, I mean, I like how, I mean, I'm not a dissector technical person. I mean, obviously, no. I mean, I really, when I started, I in school and they put it wasn't a frog. I'm from Florida. So they put catfish in front of me
Oh,
and
of
I
course.
just could not, this is not for me. And I just say that because I like how we are doing this kind of deep work because I think that's so hard is figuring out the how, the what, and everything just feels immersed like in a crock pot, like all pressure cooker. And when people start their path, whatever that looks like for them, depending on their resources, depending on where their starting point is, it all feels even more pressure cooked and it's hard to
Mhm.
make sense. So I just love hearing you say taking action, trying things, not necessarily forming an attachment with those things, but like throwing spaghetti, trying, putting yourself out there, and then also kind of doing a feedback loop. What is working for me? What are the ways that I can understand myself? Because society isn't going to tell us. There's not it's not in the system's best interest for us to know ourselves. So I love that. Any tips, or like for people out there trying to dabble or dipping their toe in I love how you said making meaning, or like I love that. So anything that might help people in a very easy way, accessible way, to start to tap into that in ways that might feel accessible.
Yeah. I mean, I think so much of it is about like following pleasure. And I find that we're definitely not encouraged to make time or space for that in our lives. And we're often told that the things that bring us pleasure may be frivolous or superficial or unimportant.
Yeah.
But I think that for me, every like big step I've taken in my career has started with like a tiny step towards something I ended up loving that brought me a lot of pleasure. And so again, like that's how I started podcasting. That's how I started reading tarot. That's how I started making zines. That's how I started writing books. Like all of that.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's not that I like one day out of the blue sat down and was like, I'm gonna write a book. It was like, I'm gonna, back in the day, it was like, I'm gonna write this Instagram post, or now it's like, I'm gonna send this email and I'm gonna keep thinking about this and I'm gonna make a podcast episode and I'm keep thinking about it. And like it kind of, the tiny steps really snowball. So I think that's a really important piece of it. And then the other piece of working with meaning making systems to me is just a very clear sense of like, take what works and leave the rest, which is something that almost every one of my spiritual teachers has ever said. But there are aspects of my astrology that make no sense to me. I'm like, that doesn't sound like me at all. That didn't be me. Like, no way. And I think then there are other aspects where I'm like, wow, that unlocked something for me that years of therapy never could. Right. So
100%.
I think that it's every relationship and every meaning making system and every experiment we do is just a mirror that holds up like a view of ourselves, a vision of ourselves. And I think that that's always what I'm seeking. It's like the mirrors that feel like me, and the ones that don't are just as useful though. Like those experiments that totally bomb, or those things you try that you hate,
oh my gosh,
have often been like even better information than the things I love. Like knowing I really don't want to do that is just as helpful as knowing I really do want to do that.
True. Yeah, because it's easier to know in some ways what you don't like, because it's like, okay, like for me, I don't enjoy horror.
And I love horror. I love it.
So I'll watch you. I'll use you as a shield if we're ever watching together. Like I like some. I don't know if it's a spectrum. The thriller, psychological. That I love that. And I should also say I'm a Sagittarius rising, Moon, Taurus, Cancer, Sun. But in terms of systems, I learned about what is it called? I think the Vedic, or like sidereal, something in there. So I'm different in that system. So it's like it's a lot of different systems. And the reason why I'm throwing all of these random things, seemingly random things together, is what you said about how we see ourselves and what resonates. Take this, leave the rest, and kind of figuring out a compass. And only we can figure out that compass as we go, and it changes over time. So I will ask my other question that I love asking my guests. What media, book, show, movie, however you categorize media, changed or shaped your life in some way, positive, negative, I don't know, and why?
Yeah, I love this question. It's so expansive, and I'm such a like media nerd that I could give a million different answers. Like I am the person who has the app where I log my books, and the app where I log my shows, and the Letterboxd account where I log all my movies I watch. And I am a like massive consumer of all of these things. Like I read, I think like 150 books last year. I watched just as many movies. I watched so many hours of TV. Like I just take in all of the media all of the time. And so it was really hard to pick something.
Oh gosh, okay.
What came to mind?
Yes.
For me, like books were my first love. I have
Mm,
always loved reading since
yeah,
I learned to read when
read.
I was
Yeah,
6 years old or something like that.
yeah, yeah.
And so I can definitely think of specific books that found me at moments in my life and how important they were to me. So the one that comes to mind that I wanted to share here today is A Field Guide to Getting Lost by Rebecca Solnit,
Oh my gosh.
which was it's this beautiful creative nonfiction book
Oh my gosh.
full of essays, but they really intertwine and intermingle.
Yeah.
And I first read it on a road trip when I was driving across the country,
Oh my
I
gosh.
believe after college,
Yeah, yeah,
and I loved it.
yeah.
And then I lost my copy somewhere. I lent it to someone, or I couldn't find it. I moved many times. So when I in my first few years in Chicago, I moved like every year, so I
Oh my
lost a bunch of stuff.
god. Okay.
And then I ended up going to Paris for a thing for school, and I was sitting in a cafe there, and they had a free box of books, and that book was in the box.
What? What are the
And
odds? Oh my god.
I know, and I would just like I saw it and I took it and I reread it, and it's a book that has always found me, or I have found it in
Mm,
times when I'm like really reimagining who I am and who I want to be.
mm.
And that book in my mind is always very closely related to the book Bluets by Maggie Nelson,
Okay, I don't
which
know.
is a beautiful experimental literary poetry
Mm,
collection.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
Um, but they both books have meditations on the
Beautiful.
color blue, which
Oh,
feels really
that-
poignant and special.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that also always leads me to Maggie Nelson's other book, The Argonauts, which is a sort of queer memoir that definitely was a part of my sort of queer awakening, and is a book I used to teach at the university when
Amazing.
I taught classes on the philosophy of sex and gender. So, okay,
Yeah.
I picked three, but those three
Oh,
books are
great.
my little triangulation of things that changed my life.
I love it. And blue, for people who are into mindfulness and all this stuff, I think, if I remember correctly, is the color of the throat chakra, which is all about
Mm,
communications and voice. And so it's just, I love all of that. Okay, so I need to make a note of that and put that so that people can find that.
yeah.
I know books. I'm just so curious because I also like movies and shows. Anything with movies, do you think is that maybe you go back to? Because I'm also a lover of rewatching. My mom and
Mhm.
my husband will disagree because they're kind of like, one and done. But I feel like there's a beauty of you going back to something as someone different. We all change. So I don't know, any movie also, just for those who may not be book lovers as we are, which is totally
Yeah.
okay. But yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, there's so many films and TV shows that I just find so profound and beautiful. The two movies I have seen the most in my life
Oh,
are from my youth, and they are Princess Diaries and Legally Blonde,
oh
which
my
are
god.
just like such a specific formative type of
Yeah.
like movie for girls, quote unquote,
Right,
for
right,
millennials, I
right.
think.
Yeah, yeah.
Both of those were so influential for me. And there were these summers in middle and high school where I would just watch them over and over and over again because I had them both on VHS. And it was
Oh,
just like,
oh
and
my
we didn't have cable at my house. I just watched these movies
gosh. Yeah.
every day. Like I would watch them, at least one of them every day. So those are always like really formative for me.
I love
When I
that.
think of other films that just like
Mm,
stay with me that I could rewatch,
yeah.
I think Singing in the Rain, the musical, which I
Oh.
saw for the first time last year, and then I wouldn't shut up about it, which was so silly. This film is like way
I
over 50 years old,
know.
and I'm here being like, do you know who Gene Kelly is? Have you heard of the movie?
Let me open
But
the door for you. Yeah.
it was so perfect to me. And then,
Oh,
I also, over the past year, my partner and I have gotten very deep into two directors, one who's an actor.
okay.
We watched all of Martin Scorsese's movies last
Oh
year,
my god.
which I am like the last person to be like, I
Yeah.
want to watch movies directed by famous male directors.
Oh
But I loved them. There's such a specific point of view and such artful filmmaking that I was so struck by all the way through. And then we also watched everything that Britt Marling has ever made.
Okay, this one I need to look into.
Yeah, so she did the show The OA on Netflix, which was like very popular and then got canceled,
Oh,
and people were extremely upset about it.
yeah.
And then she also put out a new show, I think at the start of 2024 called Murder at the End of the World. So we were watching that, and then we just went back to every movie she'd ever been in.
Oh my God.
And yeah, I kind of really enjoy that way of exploring someone's filmography and both the TV and film work that they've done. I really like to spend time with an actor or director's point of view and seeing how it unfolds across their work.
Yeah.
Similarly, I guess that came up when I talked about books, right? I talked about multiple Maggie Nelson books. I love many Rebecca Solnit books.
I know. No, I love that. No, I love that. And now I'm also inspired because I think that's going back to something that maybe I haven't touched on a while or shaped. I mean, Princess Diaries and Legally Blonde. Oh my gosh, I also haven't watched in a minute. But when the minute you said it vividly, I'm just like this archetype, this energy came up about not necessarily just women achievers, but like someone who kind of their underdog in their own story. In a ways, I guess. And no, I love that. So for this podcast gets some reach, not trying to toot my own horn, but gets some reach in other parts of the world. So I can add some context there in the show notes about what these two but I love it. I love, and I think also in terms of shows for me, I don't know if you remember the Wild Thornberries or like Kim Possible and these. And I was telling my husband is Peruvian and I was born and raised here in the States. So even though we're both Latino, like what is identity even mean? We're always redefining, I think. And so he didn't grow up with that. What context? And so I always point out to him that like for me, I think born in the 90s, there was it felt like perhaps in retrospect, hindsight, that this energy of power, empowerment, and you can do all these things. What are you talking about? You can talk to animals and also travel with your family in a safari and have these mind-blowing experiences. And I think that starting with a childhood that's very dreamy or, endless possibilities to then be kind of crashing down on earth in our high school, whatever time frame. Now, how do you figure out life? And that's nothing of the power and the limitless possibility that I was instilled. So I think that's really jarring. And our generation or millennials and maybe even Gen Z in this very limbo state of what is even structure? What is even possibilities? And we know with our current administration now, here in the US, it even feels even more restrictive than it already has been historically and culturally. So I don't know, I was going to ask what life experiences, I know we touched on that, but anything now, I guess, that is helping you or that you would recommend to help people navigate the ambiguity or like the unknown limbo state. And yeah.
I mean, something I've been talking about more and more on my podcast is how to cultivate our sense of agency, which is a different way of approaching the conversation around empowerment. I think that a lot of the empowerment conversations we were raised in had a lot to do with like empowering yourself to climb the ladder, like climb the corporate ladder, be a success, you can be the boss. Like it was a very externalized kind of power. And it's almost like people had to empower each other. Like you couldn't empower yourself in those ways. And I think what I'm interested in is like with the conversation around agency, it's like, how do we cultivate our sense of our own power that we have just as a result of being human beings who are alive in the world? Like we all have power. And of course, we live in different positions and positionalities. So some of our power is much more, for some people, it's much more highly policed than it is for others. But I think for many of us living in the United States, as scary and horrifying as things are right now, we may have a tendency to kind of give up our power before it's even been taken from us. And I think it's more important than ever that we learn how to cultivate that sense of agency, how to find the power within ourselves so that we can make demands, we can speak up and out, we can be advocates, and when needed, like put our bodies between the police and the people whose power is really, really at stake here.
Yes.
And I think, where I learned to do that, to go back to like how do we figure this out? It's challenging when you spent your whole life being told like you just have to follow the rules.
Yes.
And then you look around and you're like,
I know.
sorry, whose rules are these? Who are they helping? And what are they being used for?
Yeah.
But I learned all of this from like DIY and punk and anarchist culture. Like these communities that have always had a tenuous relationships with the powers that be and have worked against or around them rather than conceded to them. And I think that I was thinking with your question about like what media, books or movies shaped you. I'm like, but also music, like so much punk music has like reshaped my life, and being a part of these like DIY subcultures where you just like go to house shows or you show up for meetings or you table at the zine fest. Like, I think making zines was really formative for me, realizing that media could be something that I created, not that was like fed to me by a corporate power. Felt really empowering in like the most positive way. It made me realize I was powerful.
Yes.
And that's the feeling that I'm really trying to stoke right now, is like recentering my agency and positioning myself in community with other people who have found that too, so we can be powerful together.
Love it. Yes.
That's how I'm navigating this like really challenging and horrible political reality that we live in the US right now.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like the worst fears, maybe all the unconscious, subconscious, who knows, juju coming out and forcing us all to reckon. But I want to pick up a few things. One, can you give context to what a zine is? I think I know, but just so that, thank you.
Yeah. And like a very simple definition, a zine is just a handmade magazine. So it's something that you can write. It's a piece of paper that you might write and fold up and then hand to someone else.
Love it.
And so zines can be on any sort of topics. And historically, there have been a lot of different categories. There used to be a category called per zines, PER zines, and they're just personal zines about your life, little journals you might share with people. And then there are like collections of essays written by many people. There are zines that talk about the news. There are zines that talk about any topic. You can find a zine about it. And the earliest zines are all just handmade. My earliest ones were made on a typewriter or just handwritten. And then I would photocopy them at the university with my university ID card. And then I would staple them and fold them and staple them and hand them out or sell them at zine fests. So it's really like handmade magazines, but also sort of like autonomous media and distribution networks that I think are really coming back into popularity. It's like they faded out for a little. Well, I don't know if they ever faded out, but I'm just seeing them being popularized even more and more as information is being suppressed and deleted by the US government. As all these websites are going down, people are archiving them, printing them, sharing them through zines.
Oh my gosh. Well, I didn't know. I mean, I'm not immersed in all of that. I also don't know very much about Tumblr or like all of these other, not to say that zine is similar to Tumblr, but
I think you could definitely say that.
Okay.
As someone who's done both.
Oh, okay, great. But like there's so much out there that I think people, because we're all in these metaphorical but also quite literal boxes, we're put in these are the platforms, this is the media, and then it gets hard to see, wow, there's so much actually else out there underground, on the sideways, like all these other things. That I love how you said it when you created it, because I think that's what it is, each and every one of us, in a way that makes sense, that feels good, that is not draining or anything like that, but that we are able to have that seed of creation and create, whether it is a business or whatever it looks like. But I think that speaks volumes to autonomy, agency, because it recognizes the freedom, the joy, like all the values you mentioned before, in a very tangible way, like also manifesting it and embodying it. And it's a practice. It sounds like it's like an ever evolving, ever flowing. I love it. And did any of your previous, I mean, I'm sure, but I just want to ask the question anyways, the PhD in philosophy, like have any of your other past lives, or I don't know, current lives, however people view time, all your lives. How have they continued to shape or like pivot your the next iteration of you or your chapters or yeah.
Yeah. I love this question because I often will joke that I got a whole PhD just to do nothing with it, but it's really not true. It's not a good joke. I need to stop telling the joke
Oh
because
no.
it's false.
Oh no.
I think that all of the time I spent studying philosophy and writing a dissertation in it and honing those skills just made me like I guess I'm like, should I be humble? I just won't be humble.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think they
no.
made me a pretty like brilliant critical thinker,
Yeah.
and they made me able to like read and listen
Mm,
and understand an argument that's being made very quickly and pull
mm,
out the structure of it with ease. And
wow.
that's something that has served me so well as a podcaster, as a writer, as a
Yeah.
podcast editor. I
Yeah.
think that my ability to take some ideas and shape them into a narrative or an argument or framework,
Mm.
that is all work that I learned how to do when I was getting a PhD. But it's not what they say. Like they say you get a PhD in philosophy so you can like learn what all the other philosophers
Oh,
said.
yes.
I
Right.
remember very little of what any philosopher said. My like history, I would like fail a history of philosophy class right
Oh
now.
no.
But I have these skills like a way of
Mm.
thinking and a way of like constructing and deconstructing ideas that
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think has served me so well.
Yes.
And I also think that everything I've learned about listening through podcast editing just carries into everything else that I do.
Mm.
I've become such a deep and attentive listener. And that's a skill I've realized is not necessarily common in the world.
Right.
And
Mm.
my like love of zines and of punk music still comes through. Definitely in my like DIY ethos. Like I just believe I can kind of figure anything out as I go, especially when it comes to creative projects
Right.
and sharing things on the internet. Like I just kind of try it and figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that comes through all these earlier things that I did. And
Love it.
all of that's really coming together. Like I'm currently writing a book about attention and social media, and it's really pulling all of this in. Like
Yeah.
it's a very manifesto style piece of writing, which really leans to that sort of punk ethos from my background,
Love it.
and yet it's also pulling in a lot of the philosophy work that I did
Wow.
and this very like
Yeah.
esoteric thinking and like
Yeah.
more straightforward language.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a lot of the like spiritual practice I've done with the way I pull tarot cards or the metaphors that I use for things.
Yeah.
And so as much as I feel like I've had these like different discrete lives in my lifetime, it also really does weave. And part of that is like work I have to do to bring it together. But a lot of it is just allowing it to come together,
Yeah.
disowning parts of my journey or
Right.
like ignoring them when they come through in an unexpected context.
I love that. Oh my gosh. And I love the word, at least the big thing I picked up on right now is skills, because I think something that so my parents are immigrants. My whole family are immigrants. I'm the first generation born here, a couple handful of cousins, but it creates this dissonance of not
Mm-hmm.
really from here. I'm not really from there. I'm not really from anywhere. And there was no tangible kind of tactile, this is the road you take. I had different roads presented to me,
Mm-hmm.
and then learning skills. We talked about the meaning making, that's a skill. The self-assessment, self-awareness, that's a skill. And I feel like those are skills, tools, whatever the word is, that aren't preached, promoted in society.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really the things I feel that enable whoever, anyone, anywhere to be a creator, to create their own path, to distill and live by their values or whatever feels good. And that piece skills for me, I think, has been the most impactful, at least right now. I'll come back to this episode in the future and think to myself, really, Raquel, are you sure? But no, I mean skills really, because the skill of listening to emotions, or like being able to critical think in a time when so much is thrown at us and
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to take the space to digest. And when things are rapid fire, it's like how to critically think, what's the direction. So like developing these what seem perhaps to some inconsequential skills, or skills that don't create a direct value in some ways. I just love how the mosaic comes together and all the skills, like it all makes sense in a way that it's meant to, in a way that is impactful. And I just, yeah, nothing else but just, it's beautiful. So I didn't have a question there. I just all but love. I will wrap up with, do you have any, I know I keep picking your brain, but I love hearing other people. Anything that you would recommend specifically for my listeners who are either typically, and maybe I should have said this before, they're in two buckets. They're either still in corporate 9 to 5, regardless if it's a government, nonprofit, but they're working for someone else, or they're starting their journey as entrepreneurs. Any advice for either those two bubbles or individually, as they start their chapter in navigating their freedom, liberation, independence, peace, purpose, prosperity, as I like to say? Yeah, anything like that?
What a big question.
Oh.
Okay. I mean this like in the best possible way. I probably could have been an answer to my previous question,
Yeah.
but I think the most important thing to do is
Mm,
to go read a bunch of Audre Lorde, particularly like all of Sister Outsider,
okay, yes.
because Audre Lorde has this way of articulating how to like unravel our lives from the systems that control them, us. And there's this beautiful, I mean, everything that she said is
Yeah.
beautiful, but a few things that stand out to me. Like the advice I want to give is just advice
Yeah.
that she's given. So that's why I'm saying go read the book. But
I
the
love
two
it.
pieces that I really like always come through for me, or that keep showing up more and more, is like, once you start getting free in one area of your life, you want that liberation in every area of your life. And so if you want to go down this path, it is a path of unraveling every area of your life where you feel that powerlessness and finding your power there.
Love it.
And that's something that she articulates really beautifully. And the other way she spins that metaphor is she talks about, I think it's like old margarine packets or something that used to have like a seed of yellow, like a ball of bead of yellow in the middle.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you would kind of have them and you'd like pop the bead of yellow and then it would spread through the packet.
Okay.
I'm not very familiar with what this was, but she talks about them. And she says that like, once you really connect with like what she calls the erotic, which is really just like deeply felt connection with yourself and your interconnectivity with all other beings. Once you've gone there, like it starts to, like you've popped that bead and it just starts to spread into every area of your life. It makes everything so much richer and more satisfying. And it also makes you demand that feeling of everything in your life. And so all of these paths, like they take us such unexpected places, and liberating yourself, as I said before, like in the smallest way will take you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And it's a lifelong journey. You don't just like get free one day and then you're free. You like keep uncovering it.
Yes, exactly.
Both within yourself and in the things that you face in the world.
I love that. Yeah.
But I think that that's what feels most present in terms of
Love that.
advice, is like,
it's beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, just read Sister Outsider. You will never regret it.
I love it. No, it's beautiful. And I'm already like, I'm getting goosebumps because I being able to name the thing in a way that it really lands, that is felt, said, experiencing, if I can paraphrase, feeling the freedom in one aspect of your life or creating it ripples out into other. And that has been something that I think is also, not trying to put words in people's mouth, but at least for me in my experience, a bit scary, because it's kind of nice in systemic and everything, capitalist, whatever we want to call all of this stuff, structures. it's nice to have things contained, and things have to look a certain way. And
Mhm.
we live in houses that are square and cubicles that are square, and our phones are square rectangle. Like everything has to be in this
Mhm.
way. And when one thing, oh no, at least going back to the career situation, people being managed.
Mhm.
But this feeling is coming up. You can't put your personality, your feelings at the door. You're a human being with whole experiences, but it's not prim, it's not proper. But exposing that, and then
Mhm.
wanting to advocate in that space, and then it ripples out. I always say that toxic managers are like toxic relationships. It's a different relationship, and it's all so I love how you said that, because it's yeah, there's parallels everywhere, and like the ripple effects. And yeah, it's oh my gosh, I don't want to say anything too much else, because I feel like that was a mic drop. Maybe I've already
Oh, no. Everything you're sharing is
that
beautiful
was
and
beautiful.
so
Yeah,
wise and reflective as well.
that was beautiful. Well, this was amazing. Where can people find you if they want to learn about you, work with you, explore your world? Yeah.
Yeah, so you can find everything that I'm up to at ameliafreebie.com. That's my personal website. I have a blog there, and it's the main page is really kind of just an about page with links to everything that I do. If you want to keep up with me, I recommend joining my newsletter, which you can do from that page. And then I have a lot of podcasts. So if you are a podcast listener, let's see, let me run through the current ones.
Oh my gosh.
My most popular show is about leaving social media. That one's called Off the Grid, and it chronicles kind of my breakup with social media, how I run my business without it. And we're just about to hit 100 episodes. So many gorgeous interviews with small business owners and creatives. So if that's your path, you'll definitely want to listen to Off the Grid. And then I have a show about books that I love reading called Pleasure Reading. I have a show about my tarot practice called My Tiny Tarot Practice with short 5-minute episodes for every tarot card. And I launched a new show this year with my best friend, Taylor Elise Morrison, called Thought of You. And it's a long form, once a month, like pop culture chat show. So it's a really good time. I think we put out 3 episodes now. So yeah, you can find me at ameliafruby.com and all over your podcast app for sure.
I love it. So now I will definitely subscribe. I'm like, okay, now all the things. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Amelia, for your time, your energy, your wisdom, all the things that you're doing, will continue to do. Yeah, just thank you so much. I appreciate you. And to all the listeners, till next time.